people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
News. Okay, we'll start with this. It appears that Dixon has re-signed to Matchroom under a new multi-fight deal. This past weekend's fight must have been the final fight of her existing deal.
In many ways, that makes it a make-or-break fight. Was a make-or-break fight for Dixon.
And she lost? I don't think she would have been offered a multi-fight deal. The opportunity to re-sign to Matchroom and continue to box under their banner. I remember not that long ago, Amy Timlin.
I think she boxed on 1 or 2 Matchroom shows.
And she was doing all right up until that Mary Romero fight where she suffered her first professional loss over a year ago. After that, you didn't see her boxing on no more Matchroom shows. She has since rebounded off that loss, by the way, but you see what I mean.
That Mary Romero fight was a make-or-break fight for Amy Timlin, like this Vicky Wilkinson fight was a make-or-break fight for Dixon.
There was more on the line than what you saw on paper, more on the line than meets the eye. Thankfully, Dixon, she passed that acid test. In truth, Dixon is passing every acid test with flying colors. The Majuba Uptil fight.
Rhiannon looked great in that fight.
Fighting abroad against a fighter who had more of an amateur background than she did.
She looked great this past weekend.
Few awkward exchanges aside, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And Dixon, she finished strong opposite the ring than unbeaten Vicky Wilkinson,
advancing to a professional record of 8 wins, no losses, no draws, 1 knockout.
I've said it many times before, I'll say it many times again. I don't think it's necessarily Dixon or her team's intention to get Katie Taylor in the ring. Rhiannon and Katie are in very different stages, very different places in their careers. Rhiannon's just getting started, whereas Katie may be approaching the end. And I don't think it's Rhiannon or her team's intention to do a fight with Katie.
Nah.
There's more work needs doing for Rhiannon before she targets a full-fledged alphabet title.
The fighting pharmacist from out of Lygon, Lancashire.
They've got to step her up, but they have to do it gradually.
You have to tread carefully, they do.
While at the same time putting her in the ring with opponents that can give her some resistance to round her out as a fighter. I like a Katharina Thanders fight at some point later on in the year. I like a Melissa St. Ville fight. She's very experienced.
Fucking hot, too.
Smoking. In Katharina Thanders, you have a fighter that has at least challenged for a world title before. In Melissa St. Ville, you have a very experienced, albeit an aging fighter.
Fucking hot.
You have to mitigate the risks while allowing the fighter to continue to develop.
What you have to do.
I like Katharina Thanders for Dixon. I like Melissa St. Ville for Dixon. I like Heather Hardy. Heather Hardy, who's on a 2-fight winning streak, was recently in action and has no plans of retiring in spite of her age. She wants a title shot.
Questionable as to whether or not she can get one. The only other champion that's available is Alicia Baumgartner, and that is not a fight I'd pick Heather to win.
So maybe Heather can go in there with Dixon. Make some money. Certainly more money than she just made opposite the ring Cardozo.
Maybe.
The name of Anisha Bashil. Anisha Bashil, who shared the ring with Chantel Cameron some years ago, 2 or 3.
I like these fights for Dixon.
These fighters for Dixon later on in the year. I'd like to see Rhiannon box at least 2 more times this year to cap off the year with 3 fights in the bank.
Katharina Thanders, Melissa St. Ville, Heather Hardy, Anisha Bashil.
Those are sensible step-up fights against fighters that are, in fact, more experienced right now than Dixon is.
Yulia Kutsenko.
You want to put her in there with fighters that have been around the block, fighters that have challenged for world titles, fighters that at some point in their careers might have held world titles. You have to mitigate the risks while still allowing the fighter to develop.
Dixon don't come from some deep amateur background. What she's learning, she's literally learning on the job.
But she's good. She's the real thing. She's a natural.
She's already had 1 fight this year. I'd like to see her have 2 more.
A fighter with natural ability, speed, athleticism, sharpness.
She's a southpaw.
With a good straight left hand and an even better right hook. A right hook upstairs or a right hook to the body. She can fight. she can definitely fight.
And I'd like to see her fight at least 2 more times this year. I think she needs to. For a young fighter who's still developing, activity is their best friend.
Just signed a multi-fight deal with Matchroom, so I'm going to assume it will be Matchroom that keeps her busy. The onus to do that is on them, and there are enough fights they can make for her. Ample challengers to go around now that she is this division's British Commonwealth champion.
In men's super middleweight news, I'm sure most of you have heard by now, it's official. Canelo Alvarez will in fact be boxing John Ryder in his native Mexico, Guadalajara. Just a few passing thoughts. I am a bit surprised that they decided to bill this as a pay-per-view for a U.S. audience, it being that John Ryder, capable fighter that he might be, he's not a high-profile guy per se, at least not in this neck of the woods, and he's not a champion. But when you think about where the fight is going down, that it's happening south of the border, they're likely looking to compensate for what they won't make at the gate.
You see, I expect a huge turnout for this fight, I do, but you don't make the same money for the fight, at least not at the gate, south of the border that you make for it north of the border. So what they're doing is supplementing the effort,
that's it,
the money, by billing it as a pay-per-view. Canelo Alvarez is still the highest earning fighter in this part of the world, and what they can't make at the gate,
because this ain't Las Vegas, baby,
they hope to get at the box office. They hope to make billing it as a pay-per-view, and I think it'll do fairly well.
Dimitri Bivol numbers?
Maybe 400, 500,000 pay-per-view buys, maybe, because it's not a high-profile fight. John Ryder's not a high-profile fighter per se.
Though still a capable one, and a highly ranked fighter in the men's super middleweight division. For all the guys taking the piss out of Canelo for fighting this guy.
A recorded win over Daniel Jacobs, a recorded win over then unbeaten Zach Parker, who Demetrius Andrade was supposed to fight before he pulled out.
Rated top 10 in his division, top 5 in some divisional rank standings.
He ain't no bum who just walked into a boxing gym off the street. John Ryder's been around for a long time. He's been there and done that.
The aesthetic of the match.
People don't realize it now, but this is going to be a fan-friendly affair. This is going to be a fan-friendly fight, an action fight, because John Ryder, if he's anything, he's an action fighter, a pressure fighter.
A southpaw.
This isn't going to be a fight of finesse. You know, John Ryder, I'm sure he's aware, the odds are stacked against him. They are, fighting the likes of Canelo Alvarez, the cash cow of boxing, in the cash cow of boxing's neck of the woods. But John Ryder is a pressure guy who stays in character. Canelo ain't going to have to go out there looking for him. He's not going to have to find him. John will bring him the fight.
It's going to be an action fight.
More action, I'd say, than we got in the Callum Smith and Billy Joe Saunders fights. More action than we got in the Caleb Plant fight, because John Ryder, he's no back foot fighter, no lateral movement.
Not a pure boxer.
He's a pressure fighter, a pressure guy, and he's going to try to keep Canelo Alvarez under pressure.
It's going to be an action fight.
And that's what you want to deliver to the fans south of the border. Those fight fans in Mexico that are used to producing some of the best action fighters the sport has ever seen. John Ryder is actually a fitting opponent for such an engagement. The real selling point here is that Canelo Alvarez is returning home.
Having fought abroad for so many years north of the border.
It's been a very long time since he fought on his native soil, his native Mexico, south of the border. And that's the appeal here. But the fight itself, believe it or not, it's going to be a fun fight to watch. It's going to be a fan-friendly fight.
Canelo Alvarez, he's 32 years old to John Ryder, who's 34.
John's 2 years older than Canelo, sporting a professional record of 32 wins with 5 losses.
18 knockouts.
The mandatory challenger by way of the WBO for Canelo Alvarez, who sports a professional record of 58 wins, 2 losses with 2 draws.
39 knockouts.
John Ryder is a little bigger than Canelo Alvarez, just a tad bit taller.
It's going to be an action fight, I'm telling you.
In addition to what is already a great schedule of fights that kicks off towards the end of this month, March going into May, all the way through April.
Through April into May.
Now, as you can imagine, the Boo Birds have already started up with their criticisms and their overall nonsense.
Right. All those guys that are highly impressed with an inactive Jermall Charlo.
Guy who hasn't fought in close to 2 years, or Demetrius Andrade, who last shared the ring with a journeyman in Desmond Nicholson and got sat on his back pocket for it.
Could you imagine what people would say if Canelo Alvarez was sat on his back pocket by the likes of a Desmond Nicholson?
I mean, could you imagine what people would be saying on Sunday morning if it were Canelo that got dropped by a Desmond Nicholson and not a Demetrius Andrade? The passes these guys get.
They're very basic and paper-thin resumes. The overall mediocrity of their careers.
They'll trash a guy like John Ryder, who has a recorded win over a former champion in Daniel Jacobs, a fighter of some notoriety.
They'll trash John Ryder, but who the hell did Jermall Charlo beat in his last fight? Who did Demetrius Andrade beat?
John Ryder beat an unbeaten Zach Parker in his last fight, the guy that Demetrius Andrade was supposed to take care of, and we're supposed to turn around and turn our noses up at him?
No way.
You want me to think of Jermall Charlo and Demetrius as being better by proxy, better by default than a John Ryder based on what?
What?
Can't be their resumes.
What, because they're from America?
Deontay Wilder was from America. That didn't stop Tyson Fury from kicking his ass up and down that ring the last 2 times.
So spare me.
You're hypocritical that Canelo's fighting John Ryder, but who did David Benavidez fight last year?
David Lemieux.
David Benavidez fought David Lemieux for the same reason that Canelo Alvarez is fighting John Ryder. That's his mandatory challenger. That's a fight that was ordered.
Same way the WBC ordered Benavidez versus Lemieux is the same way the WBO ordered Canelo versus Ryder.
Spare me your double standards.
Oh, you're fucking bullshit.
Spare me. You're telling me you're going to shell out $80 for Benavidez versus Plant, which is long overdue. Benavidez versus Caleb Plant, who Canelo knocked out over a year ago. You're going to pay for that, but you're too good for this.
Whatever.
Whatever the fuck ever.
Whatever.
You're hypercritical of Canelo, but very understanding of Demetrius Andrade and Jermall Charlo, David Benavidez. These guys who have a lot of catching up to do with that redhead.
Hey, man, that's fucking awesome.
But I couldn't give 2 flamingo-shaped fucks what you think about Canelo's career or their career.
I really couldn't. At some point, the arguments stop making sense.
So go tell somebody who cares all that fucking bullshit.
Look for Canelo versus Ryder in early May.
You've got Canelo versus Ryder in early May, and 2 weeks prior to that, you have Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia.
And both the pay-per-views.
Both are box office fights. As you can imagine, Leonard Ellerbe, up to his old shtick, says Tank versus Ryan is the biggest fight in boxing. The live gate will be top 10 of the biggest live gates ever in the history of the sport. Major props to both Gervonta and Ryan for stepping up and making this fight happen.
I think they said all the tickets have sold out.
But I expected that the fight would do a good gate, a very good gate. It's at the box office that I have questions.
A Twitter account that goes by the name King Tico stated, "Diehards want it, but it has no mainstream appeal. Also, the pay-per-view model has changed. It will do 700,000 buys. Tops."
700,000 pay-per-view buys isn't bad in this landscape, you understand, but it definitely falls short of the 2.4 million pay-per-view buys Oscar De La Hoya expects it to bring in.
It is not going to bring in 2.4 million pay-per-view buys.
Forget it. Leonard Ellerbe was quoted as saying, "Love it or hate it, for years I've been saying Gervonta will eventually be the biggest star in the sport. When he wins on April 22nd, he will be the new face of boxing."
Oh, really?
Look, it's conceivable that Davis versus Garcia might actually sell more pay-per-views than Canelo versus Ryder.
It's possible.
The disconnect is that in doing so, the winner of the match henceforth becomes the face of boxing moving forward. For you to be the face of boxing, you've got to be able to sell more pay-per-views than Canelo Alvarez.
More off your name alone.
Canelo doesn't have a high-profile dance partner the same way that Gervonta has a high-profile dance partner.
John Ryder isn't to Canelo what Ryan is to Gervonta.
Gervonta Davis warns Canelo is on his way out, and he is the face of boxing.
Gervonta Davis has been on pay-per-view 5 times, and all 5 times he failed to crack 300,000 pay-per-view buys, whereas Canelo can get out there with a little-known Russian light heavyweight champion and still bring in 500,000 pay-per-view buys.
All without a high-profile dance partner. Gervonta Davis was quoted as saying, "I feel as though I'm already that guy in the sport. Canelo is going out the door. All these guys. I'm the face of boxing. Let's just say that. After this win, it's just me getting over the hump. If you don't watch boxing, this is the fight to watch for sure."
It's conceivable that Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia may do more at the box office than Canelo versus Ryder.
It's possible because it's taking place 2 weeks before Canelo versus Ryder, and it's a fight that's been built up over the years, whereas Canelo versus Ryder...
It's not a fight that's been built up. That's not Canelo versus another big name, another high-profile fighter.
He doesn't have another high-profile fighter opposite the ring to help him sell it the way that Gervonta Davis has a high-profile fighter to help him sell it. I mean, whatever Davis versus Garcia does, it's not doing that off Gervonta Davis's name alone. We see what Gervonta Davis brings in on his own. Off his name alone, he can't crack 300,000 pay-per-view buys. Off his name alone, after 5 separate pay-per-view appearances, he has yet to hit the 300,000 mark. Canelo hit that with Erislandy Lara years ago, off his name alone. Canelo hit that with Erislandy Lara, Alfredo Angulo, Liam Smith. Canelo can get out there here today in this landscape where piracy is at an all-time high with a little-known Russian light heavyweight champion and still bring in 500,000 pay-per-view buys. Can you do that?
You know the answer.
And you better win. You better beat Ryan Garcia. You better knock him out, because if you don't, it really won't matter what the pay-per-view brings in.
You better beat Ryan.
Ryan Garcia, who warns Gervonta Davis, he better start training his chin.
If Gervonta Davis loses that fight, at least based on his own logic, Ryan Garcia would be the one that becomes the face of boxing moving forward.
To the victor go the spoils. Isn't that what they say? And if you don't beat this guy, if he pulls this off and you lose and he wins...
Are you still the face of boxing?
As the former multi-divisional star continues to ramp up his camp's activity, Garcia has done the same. In his most recent outing, the flamboyant contender made quick work of Javier Fortuna, blasting him out in the 6th round after their July 2022 showdown. With Davis putting in the work behind the scenes, Garcia has decided to offer a bit of advice to his longtime rival. In short, Garcia hopes that Davis is doing much more than simply hitting the bag and sparring countless hours in preparation for their mega bout. He better start training his chin, Garcia said to Inside Fighting. He better start training his chin.
The thing is that while Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia might actually end up selling more pay-per-views than, say, Canelo versus Ryder, you can't compare them because one fight has been built up over years.
At least 3 or 4 years now, whereas the other fight, the Canelo fight, that's just a keep busy fight. That's just Canelo satisfying a mandatory challenger.
That wasn't built up over years. He doesn't have a high-profile dance partner opposite the ring the same way Gervonta does.
Whatever it does, it's going to do that off Canelo Alvarez's name alone, whereas it seems to me like Gervonta is taking all the credit for what the Ryan Garcia fight does, even though he's got Ryan to help him sell it. We see what you do on your own.
If this fight does 700,000 pay-per-view buys or 1 million pay-per-view buys, it's not doing that because of you and you alone. You don't normally put up numbers like that. You add Ryan to the equation, and that changes things. Can you do that on your own moving forward?
And moving forward, what's the plan to consistently put up the kind of numbers that this fight might put up? What, you're going to have a rematch with Isaac Cruz? You think you're going to come close to selling 1 million pay-per-view buys? Fighting him again? Fighting Rolly again?
Davis versus Garcia is a high-profile fight, but those fights are not.
You want to talk about high-profile fights? You'd have to fight the winner of Haney versus Lomachenko, or maybe Shakur Stevenson.
If you beat Ryan moving forward, those are the only high-profile fights the lightweight division has to offer, the super lightweight division.
You'd have to fight the winner of Teofimo Lopez versus Josh Taylor, or maybe Regis Prograis.
If you don't, you go back to doing the same kind of numbers you were doing before you fought Ryan.
What do you think? That this thing does, I don't know, between 700,000 and 1 million pay-per-view buys, and you're going to do that every single time you get out there moving forward?
You're not.
You're going to need another high-profile dance partner to put up numbers like that.
So is the winner of the fight really the face of boxing moving forward?
I don't think so. These two guys, they're not the highest paid athletes in the American market or the global market for that matter.
Those eggs need more bacon.